I've got Senator from New South Wales representing, of course, the Liberal Party. Her name is Hollie Hughes. Hollie Hughes, I wonder whether anyone has touched up your image at any stage.
Oh, Joe, you can't mess with perfection, clearly. No, I mean, what your point is very serious, though, that you just wouldn't know. And, political enemies elsewhere could use these sorts of inappropriate images and distribute them, say it's you. And I mean, we know, in this Me Too movement, post-world, that politicians now accused of anything, it's trial by media and it's guilt at the beginning, like you're just automatically guilty.
Yeah.
And so the fact that these things could occur and not be in any shape or form anywhere near reality is a very frightening prospect. And it is something that everyone needs to be attuned to. And I think you need to come with a little cynicism when you start to see these allegations about people, whether or not they're even true.
Yeah, it's old-fashioned tradition in newspaper newsrooms, especially in the production department, to use a kind of photo, an embarrassing photo that fits the allegation made against the politician. I noticed that Donald Trump, what paper was it? I can't remember. I think it was the New York Post or no, it wasn't the New York Post. Might have been the Times. But anyway, there he was at the podium yesterday, and they got a snap at a time when he was gesticulating and going like this. He looked as mad as a meat axe, like he looked mad. And the story was about accusations of what he might do in the first 24 hours of becoming president. Yeah. And there was a photo on the front page of The Australian of Anthony Albanese, which was not flattering at all. And it was a story about him telling lies. So they're trying to get something that made him look as if he just told a lie. So that's been going on forever. But this is a different ball game.
Yeah. And look, they do quite often get a still of you speaking in the parliament or, talking to you now and get a still where they manage to get you looking like you're a bit of a moron or a bit of a deal or something because you've got your mouth open in a weird way halfway through saying word. And they use that photo. And look, I know I've had photos in the paper and thought, God, really? That's the best they could come up with? And it's deliberate. Of course it is. Hey, we've got a shocker of it. We'll use this one. But the fact that it could now just be completely and utterly false and your head is just AI generated somewhere on, another body is extraordinary.
Wow.
And very worrying.
Yeah, very worrying. Like, how do you legislate against that? You can't.
Well, yeah. I mean, it really is just going to come down to people being, as I said, having a little cynicism when they see these things.
Yeah.
And maybe people might need to be believed when they say, not me.
Yeah. All right, let's now talk about the bloke who was on the front page of The Australian looking like he just told a lie, Anthony Albanese. He's on a tour of Middle Australia to bask, no doubt, in what he would deem to be the glory of his broken promise over stage 3 tax cuts, because he's decided, if you haven't caught up with the story and you're listening, to share those cuts among the people who he's let down, the middle class of Australia. Some political writers are saying that this will nullify the lie because he's spreading the advantage. And the PM himself had this to say in Rockhampton in Queensland this morning.
This is a change of policy. It's a change for the better, and we're doing the right thing for all of the right reasons. And Australians can trust me to be prepared to make difficult decisions, not the easy decision. That is the priority that I have, putting people before politics.
Oh, you'd have to. As soon as I heard that, I scoffed, and I'm sure everyone else did.
Makes your skin crawl, really, doesn't
Yes.
it? It's actually gaslighting the Australian people. It's, telling you, I didn't lie to you. I'm doing what's best for you. And people seem to forget these things are referred to as stage 3 tax cuts because there has already been stage 1 and stage 2 that was specifically designed for lower income earners. This was designed for bracket creep. But worse than that, he came out on election night when he became Prime Minister, Truth, Treaty, The Voice, and then The Voice was an election promise. And even when it was doomed to fail, he still spent $450+ million on something because it was an election promise. He has promised on over 100 occasions that he had no intention to make any changes to the stage 3 tax cut, that they were legislated, that Labor had supported them, that these were law, that is exactly what would happen. And people have made decisions and plans around the tax cuts that they thought they were going to get.
Right.
And the people that pay the most tax are the people at the higher end. You know, it's something like 3% of people pay over 30% of tax in this country. So the majority of tax is paid for by those high income earners who now, and I mean, if you live in Melbourne and Sydney, $180,000 a year does not put you near middle Australia at all. Like, I mean, the cost of living alone is extraordinary. So I think he's out of touch with what middle Australia is and what it looks like now. And the number of people whose salaries have crept up since 2018 into that bracket, and 2008 since it was last changed. So, you know, there's a lot of people that have been let down, but he was going to, this was the, you know, he was Mr. Integrity. He was Mr. Doing politics different. He was the one that set the standard that I am going to keep my word. My word is my bond. And over 100 times he said he was not going to do anything. And then I think what actually compounds it as well is that he had that emergency caucus meeting. You know, they all had to get together in Canberra at a cost of $500,000 so the Labor caucus could discuss this. When they've already got ads ready to roll out straight away, it was not a discussion of caucus on whether or not they thought this would help. This was a decision.
Fake.
This was a decision that was taken before Christmas that this is what they were going to do.
Yep.
Both he and Chalmers were out saying that they were in no position. They weren't going to make changes right up until the day they did, but we know they decided to make the changes a couple of months earlier. So he not only lied all the times that he said he wasn't going to make change, he lied after they'd already decided they were going to do it.
Yes.
He lied and got the caucus there under false pretenses. So did he lie to his own party room saying, I want to hear from you, and then get them to Canberra and go, by the way, we're doing this, whether you like it or not. So every Labor MP and senator is now absolutely burdened with this lie. And how can you ever take them seriously again?
And worse still, and Simon Benson wrote a little bit about what I'm about to say today about this being an assault on inspiration and aspiration. If you work your butt off and become successful, well, don't expect a zack from the government. That's the message he's sending.
Well, and a lot of small businesses are started when people have jobs and work the weekend and at night to set up their own business. Why are people going to do this anymore? Because they're now going to be slugged with so much tax. It's going to be difficult for them to justify, why would I work harder? Why would I do more? But it's so insulting to say to Australians, this is cost of living relief. The average worker, thanks to this government and their economic mismanagement, has lost over $8,000 a year out of their real wages. With inflation and increased cost of living, their real wages are $8,000 per year down. This alleged cost of living relief that's going to be provided to them will give these average earners around $800 a year more. It is 10%
drop in the ocean
they've already lost under this government. So they're not going to be better off. They're already worse off under this government. And I remember Amanda Vanstone being pilloried once because of the cost of a milkshake and something with regards to what a tax cut looked like. You know, $15 a week to a family who's experiencing cost of living pressures is not going to go very far in this day and age at all. It's just insulting all around.
Yeah, spot on. I'm glad you made that comparison because it does sum up how much of a piddle in the ocean it all is. I've got Hollie Hughes with me right now. I do want to go to a caller, if I may, in just a short moment, but I want to mention the Australian Financial Review polling data that they got hold of. Now, this is apparently internal Liberal Party polling, Hollie, published in the AFR. It reveals that the Prime Minister's popularity has fallen through the floor in the seat of Dunkley, which is where Labor faces losing the upcoming by-election.
Yeah, I think it's a big call to say they're going to face losing this by-election. Peter Murphy was a very popular local member, and after her tragic death, you'd almost expect that the government would maintain a lot of sympathy in the seat for what's happened to Peter and support flowing through. I think they are a whole lot less popular than they were when they won the Aston by-election. But if the government doesn't hold this by-election, it will be a very bad sign for them. And if you look at these stage 3 tax cuts, they are almost specifically designed. The rolling back of stage 3, the breaking the promise, has almost been strategically designed for Dunkley. If you look at the demographic in that seat, it's something like only 5,000 people in the whole seat that will be impacted and not get the tax cut that they were promised. So you could be cynical there and say that this is just a desperate grab, a major broken promise to all Australians in a desperate bid from this desperate Prime Minister to hang on in a by-election. He should be winning.
It's a very good point you make. I want to go to Glenn the truckie who's phoned through. Glenn, Hollie Hughes is listening. Go right ahead.
Hey, Hollie. Look, I agree with everything that's been said about these lying mongrels, the Labor Party. Reality is we always out here in the great lied to us, but at least they had the decency to try and pretend that they weren't. They just lie all the time now. But what I really want to know, Hollie, it's come out that our education system's indoctrinating our children. There was a poll taken on Australia Day, and it was said that the 16 to 24-year-old bracket wanted it changed, and it was due to the indoctrination of our children. Now, we just had the Teachers for Palestine exposed on Sky News. What is the New South Wales Parliament going to do to sack every one of those teachers and fix our education system? So
before Hollie answers that, let me just tell our listeners and our viewers exactly what that story was last week. That audio tape was discovered where teachers were plotting, basically, to teach the pro-Palestinian version of what's occurring in the Middle East at the moment, even in mathematics class. That was the story. Go ahead.
So I'm wondering, now that everybody knows that the indoctrination of our children is to the detriment of our country, and I'm wondering what you politicians are going to do about it, because the education system comes under state power, doesn't it? Or am I wrong?
So, yeah, Glenn, it does come under state parliament, and I'm in the federal parliament, so I don't want to mislead you and say that I can tell you what the New South Wales Parliament's going to do, because I'm not a part of it. I do agree with you, though, that there has been an indoctrination of children, and unfortunately an indoctrination of our children from almost preschool. And I can tell you last year I provided to a friend of mine a whole series of small flags and bits and pieces I had in my office about Australia Day, because his son's preschool, we're talking about 3 and 4-year-olds, were not going to acknowledge Australia Day. Oh. They were acknowledging Chinese New Year. They were acknowledging other international days. They would do NAIDOC week, but they were not acknowledging Australia Day. So my friend Nick got a whole lot of flags and bits and pieces from my office and took them in himself and gave them out to the kids so they had them for Australia Day. I'm a mother of 3 teenagers in high school, and my kids know better, but they come home quite often and tell me what an interpretation of a text was that they were reading. My daughter, who's coming into her last couple of years at school, she's been old enough over the last bit while the referendum, etc., has been going on, to hear the viewpoints of her teachers, which did not line up with those of us that were supporting the No campaign and supporting Australia remaining together, not divided. You are 100% correct when you talk about the Palestinian absolute propaganda being pushed in the classrooms. I remember, I think it was even with you, Chris, in an interview I did, that we hear the chant from the river to the sea.
Yeah.
Well, my first question is, what river and what sea? Yeah. And I bet half the teachers couldn't answer that question, let alone the students, because it is nothing but philosophy and indoctrination. So I don't know what the New South Wales State Education Department's going to do, but we need to get back to the basics in the classroom. We need our kids to be able to read, write, do some maths, know how to research things, know how to think about issues and get information from different sources, this absolute rubbish that's being pushed down their throats needs to stop.
Yeah. But we need to put pressure on state governments to handle teachers, Glenn.
I agree. Thank you for your answer, Hollie. And because I now know you are in the federal parliament, Hollie, can you please make sure that minister, foreign minister of ours, gets sacked, because she's been funneling money to terrorists for years now. So I'm disgusted in our whole country. Because
the funding to UNRWA has now finally been ceased, and the UNRWA funding should have been ceased a long time ago.
Yep.
I've actually, Glenn, covered in federal parliament in a couple of speeches where I've read from the textbooks that UNRWA, which is a UN organisation funded by many nations around the world, where their text to teach maths, to teach English, uses highly anti-Semitic instruction and examples, and encourages martyrdom, again being taught to the children of Gaza as young as 3 and 4 years old. And this is being funded by us. So we need this to stop, and we need to stop funding organisations who are fundamental. Well, we now know UNRWA has staff who were members of Hamas.
How about a little bit of scrutiny? Like, at the end of the day, why wouldn't we scrutinise this stuff a lot more than what we do? Glenn, I've got to leave you there. I want to go on to this specific subject that Hollie has raised, the UNRWA. We've got a major worldwide freeze on funding from various countries, including Australia, because there are some serious allegations of, let's put it bluntly, Hamas plants within the organisation, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I can give you and your listeners examples. I've read them out in Parliament of teachers employed by the UN and their social media calling for another Holocaust, calling for a genocide of Israelis. Yeah. And these are people, this is not new. This is the thing. A lot of us have been saying UNRWA should not be funded for a long, long time. Yeah. We have known for a long time that there are Hamas sympathisers in there, that the indoctrination of Palestinian children has been long running. And that is why it is so difficult to find a two-state solution, because these kids have been taught since before they can almost walk that, you know, Israel needs to be wiped off the map. That is what From the River to the Sea means. It means Israel is obliterated. So, you know, we shouldn't have been funding them. And Penny Wong, the fact that she went to Israel, went to Jordan first and announced more funding for UNRWA when she already knew all of these things. Everybody knew them. This is not new information. And she announced more funding for them that she has now been embarrassed into backing down on, because thankfully Australia, for a very long time, I feel like we haven't been standing with our allies internationally, but we are standing with our allies now and saying no more.
Yeah. At least they've been forced into that position. I wonder whether they would have done anything if they weren't forced. I doubt it. Why is Labor wanting to tamper with negative gearing? Do they forget what happened to Bill Shorten at the election before last?
Well, I mean, keep in mind, they've told us they were not going to touch negative gearing and they're not going to put a tax on the family home. But this was in the same breath that they told us there would be no changes to superannuation, that the stage 3 tax cuts were legislated and would remain the same. So they've broken those two promises on superannuation. They've broken the promise on stage 3 tax cuts. Why would we believe them? And the weasel words that Jim Chalmers is using again have very strong reflections of what they were saying about the stage 3 tax cuts. So, you know, we need to be really aware here that the changes this government is trying to make to the fabric of our society, to the way that it works, and that these will not be quick fixes when hopefully there's a change of government in around 12 months' time, because, you know, they are now putting in place long-standing damage. Because why would people, you know, want to invest?
Yeah,
why would people? And if you put it in a situation where people are offloading investments because they're no longer, you know, a worthwhile investment for them, then you're absolutely putting the housing market as a whole in jeopardy. And when most people who do have equity in their own home, that is their biggest asset. Yeah. So it's all good to talk about housing affordability, but if you start to absolutely send the housing market over a cliff, you are destroying the biggest asset of most Australians who do own a home.
Good point. Good point. And they'll suffer because of it once again, because they forget about what they've been culpable of in the past. I've got to run. You've got to run. Thank you so much for your time. It's great to have you on the program.
See you soon.
Appreciate it. Fantastic. Hollie Hughes, Senator from New South Wales. When I say she's a Senator from New South Wales, yeah, for Glenn's purpose and other listeners and viewers, she is a federal senator. That's the way it works in Australia. She's a federal senator. She just happens to live in New South Wales, and there are a number of senators from the Liberal Party who are installed as senators, and that's where she comes from. But when it comes to teachers and their, politicisation of the classroom, it is state governments that should be condemned for allowing it to happen. Now, I know that the Premier, Chris Minns, made statements last week when we heard that tape, which dobbed themselves in, but what has he done about it? He says, big words and tough words on the day, but when the story sort of peters out by the next day, you don't hear a thing about what they're doing. I'll keep across that too, because that was just outrageous.